guys, welcome to today's lesson. My name is Srinidhi. I'm an educator on Unacademy. You guys can follow me on Unacademy by downloading the Unacademy learning app on your phone, and please do check out the YouTube channel as well. So in this particular course, we're going to learn about Pride and Prejudice. So the previous lesson was about the background and the introduction to characters. So in this lesson, I'm going to start giving the summary. So let's get started.
Hey guys, we're going to learn about Pride and Prejudice in a more detailed way now. So I'm going to give you the summary, or you can say I'm going to narrate the story in a very brief way. Alright, so let's get started. So the story starts with the arrival of a young, wealthy man named Charles Bingley in Netherfield Park. So Netherfield Park is where the Bennets are living, and also where where basically the story starts. All right. So Charles Bingley, as I told you all, belongs to a very, very wealthy family. So he gets to own parks, mansions, and gets to travel wherever he wants, and gets to lead a very luxurious life. So when he arrives in town, there is a lot of unrest among the people because they want to make they want to build a relationship with him. They want to be in the good books of the wealthy people. So that's what the mentality of people were in that town when he arrived. So Mrs. Bennet is no exception. So she's actually very desperate to marry her for 5 daughters. So when she hears about the arrival of Charles Bingley, she's gone to frenzy. So she just wants her husband to go and talk to him in person. So she finally persuades him, and Mr. Bennet goes and talks to Mr. Bingley. And what happens is that, they actually meet at a ball. So a ball is a social event where all the people come together and socialize and, make friends or make alliances for their kids. So Bennet attend a ball in which Mr. Bingley is present, and so is Mr. Darcy. So what happens is Mr. Bennet is persuaded by his wife again, Mrs. Bennet, to actually introduce her family, their family, to Mr. Bingley. So unfortunately, Mr. Bennet is not all that interested in this social life. So just because his wife told him and persuaded him, he goes, and the entire family gets introduced to Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy. So Mr. Bingley attends the ball with Mr. Darcy and his sister, Miss Bingley. Okay, in this entire story, we will be addressing them as Mr. Bingley or Charles, and Miss Bingley is his sister, and Mr. Darcy. Okay, now, so when they get introduced, so Charles Bingley and James Bennet are, the attraction between them is inevitable at the first sight itself. So they hit it off right at the beginning, and Charles is so moved by her beauty that he spends the entire evening with Jane alone. Okay, he does not dance with anybody else. The entire ball, he spends time with Jane. So this gives Mrs. Bennet a hope that Jane might actually end up with Charles Bingley, and she's really happy about that alliance forming. And then, but on the other side, Mr. Darcy is very arrogant and obnoxious. So he's actually proud of his social status. He does not agree to dance with Elizabeth Bennet because he finds her from not a very wealthy family, not from a very well-to-do family. So he actually refuses to dance with her, and this gives Elizabeth a chance to hate him and have prejudiced thoughts about him even before knowing what his true character is. Okay, so the attraction between Jane and Charles is very, very well written in the beginning, whereas Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy are on the opposite poles, so they don't get along well at all in the beginning. And then after a few more meetings, few more balls, few more social events, Darcy gets attracted to Jane because of her intelligence and charm. So Elizabeth is not a very common or a very normal woman in those days. So she's quite unique, and she's very outspoken. So sometimes her wit actually gets her into trouble, but she's a person who does what she feels like. So she's well educated, whereas other women back then all learned to knit sweaters and other stuff, and always they were always interested in their outer beauty, so how to keep themselves prim and prime. Whereas this woman, Darcy, this woman, Elizabeth, was very humble and very soft spoken woman. Not soft spoken, very soft and kind hearted woman. Okay, now, so in due course of time, Jane's friendship with Charles develops. So, and then once she agrees to pay a visit to his mansion, but on the way she falls ill because she goes by a horse, not by a cart. So this is actually planned by her mother, Mrs. Bennet, who actually predicts that it might rain, and if she goes in a cart she will come back, so she won't fall ill and she won't be able to spend more time in the mansion with Charles. So she purposely sends her on a horse, expecting her to fall ill because of the rain, and she eventually falls ill. She falls sick and she is forced to stay in the mansion of Charles for a longer time. Okay, so they get to hear about her sickness, and Elizabeth Bennet arrives at the mansion to help her sister heal better. So unlike Jane, she does not go by a horse or a cart. She prefers to walk. So she goes by foot and through the muddy fields, so her clothes are all dirty and spattered, but she does not pay any attention to it because she's really happy to walk it off. She does not pay attention to people's comment when she arrives. So Miss Bingley actually passes a snobbish comment by the looks of her. So, but she doesn't care at all. So all that matters to her is if she likes it, she does it. She does not care about the world. Okay, so what happens is that she actually arrives to help her sister heal better, and she thanks Charles for taking care of her sister. So Miss Bingley notices Darcy's interest in Elizabeth. So Mr. Darcy is actually very interested in Elizabeth because he is very intrigued by her charm, intelligence, and outspoken nature. But Miss Bingley does not like it because she's actually interested in Mr. Darcy. So she wants to keep her social status up high. So even she is from a very well-to-do family. Mr. Darcy is also a wealthy man, so she wants to make their relationship work. But when she sees Mr. Darcy is interested in Elizabeth, she causes a lot of misunderstandings. She actually makes the situations very sour in certain times. So once Jane is all healed, Jane and Elizabeth head back home. So when they return, they find Mr. Collins is visiting them. So I told you guys in the first lesson, so Mr. Collins is Mr. Bennet's cousin and also a clergyman. So he is entitled to acquire Bennet's property after the death of Mr. Bennet. Okay, so he's visiting his cousin, so that is Mr. Bennet. So what happens is during the dinner, he is very, very he acts in a very foolish way. He keeps boasting about himself and all other stuff. So this actually causes Jane and Elizabeth and all the other daughters to laugh at him, and actually they're least interested in what he has to say. So after the dinner, he sort of talks to Mrs. Bennet, asking for Jane's hand. That means he says that he's interested in Jane, whereas Mrs. Bennet says that Jane is, she's going to get engaged to Charles Bingley, and he might as well look into the next best proposal, that is Elizabeth Bennet. So Mrs. Bennet is all out to get the 5 daughters married. So even though she realizes Collins is a very dumb man, she still proposes to she still proposes him to get married to her second daughter, which is Elizabeth. So going according to her words, Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth. So does she accept it or will she reject him? I'll tell you guys in the next lesson. Bye bye.